Hi there. I am going to attempt to walk you through how I do my complete check. This is essentially a file review. Someone has reached out to me and wants me to do their bookkeeping. I don't ever quote any pricing or anything until I've had a chance to look at their books. And I personally charge for this service because they do get a report out of this. And then that way, if they choose to have someone else do the cleanup and the bookkeeping, I've at least been compensated for my time. If they choose to have me do the cleanup, then I usually apply that the money that I charge for this, what I call a complete check, to their cleanup. So it becomes free for them. So anyway, I want to show you basically how to do this. First thing I wanted to mention is typically I have two screens going when I'm doing this. I have books on one side and the questionnaire that I'm about to show you on the other. And then it's a lot easier and quicker for me to switch back and forth to see what I need to see. But due to the constraints of the video, I am going to have to switch back and forth here. So that being said, it's going to maybe take a little bit longer than it normally does, but you'll get a good idea of how this works. The other thing I want to mention is that when we go to do a review, we're never trying to we're not trying to fix any problems that we find. We're simply just trying to find the problems. Typically, a complete check takes me no longer than an hour or maybe a little bit more, but I would definitely say keep your review under 2 hours. Even if it's a complex file. You can always say that something needs further research. If you find something that looks like it's a mess, and quote accordingly for the cleanup, but you do not want to spend the time on the review itself, especially if you're not billing for it. So without further ado, you have a folder called Complete Check in your drive right now, and it has everything except for this worksheet here. You don't need this. This is something that I had that was extra. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into the form, and I have that up here. And in order to fill out this form, we're going to hit this eyeball, which is the preview button. We always want to be in preview so we can actually fill this out. So we're going to start with some basics, the name of the company, the date that you're doing the check. Okay, so it starts with company setup. Are all preferences set up correctly? Now this is always a good place to start. We always go into accounts and settings here. You can do this review with a desktop file as well. You just need to know where everything is. So here's what I'm looking for. First off, obviously they haven't filled in hardly anything. So it's pretty incomplete. It's not gonna let me even continue, I don't think, without inputting something. So I'm just going to type in a random address. Okay, so that's a note that we need to make right away, is that there is no address or anything on file. So are all preferences set up correctly? Or this is actually the second question, is company information entered? No. And then what I'm going to do is, you notice these are checkboxes, so I can select more than one. And I always make my notes in the other. And when you're making these notes, you want to make sure they're complete sentences, because they're going to feed over onto a really nicely formatted report once you submit this form. And if you do complete sentences as opposed to taking quick notes here, then there's less that you need to edit on the other side. So I'm going to say something to the effect of, in order to access this settings, I had to type in a phony address and telephone number to move past the beginning phase. This will need to be updated accordingly. Okay, so that's one note. The other thing, when you're going through the preferences, you want to try and be mindful of some of the more specific settings. For instance, class tracking, location tracking, billable time. Do they have inventory on? You know, those sorts of things. So as you can see, this is really not filled out much at all. I put in the fake address. There's no tax form, no industry, no logo, no EIN. Is all of this necessary? No, but in order to have complete books, we should definitely try and fill this out. So it's something we're going to definitely want to mention. So I'm going to go to the end of my sentence here, and I'm going to add no EIN, no logo, no industry type. And I'm just going to leave it as that. Now, I'm not going to mark it as something that requires immediate action because her books are going to work regardless, right? So we're not going to worry about that. But at least we have it noted that we looked at it and we noticed problems, okay? So it's kind of important to have a little bit of an idea of what the company does prior to doing the review. It's not absolutely mandatory, but it will require less going back and forth into the settings down the road. This particular company that we're looking at is a life coaching and consulting company. And so they, you know, likely aren't going to have things like inventory. So I wouldn't expect to see that turned on. Probably no billable time, although that is a big maybe. But just have an idea in your mind so that when you go through the settings, you can pinpoint really quickly if something seems off. Okay, it looks like they're signed up for QuickBooks Simple Start. So they have, this one is the most basic. That's another thing you want to be mindful of. If there's someone that is going to need inventory or budgeting or class tracking or things like that, then they're definitely going to need to upgrade to have those things. Then again, if it's a tiny little company, they may not need something that fancy and they could probably downgrade it. It pays to mention that. No live bookkeeping, no payroll, no payments. Okay, so usage. They've got one user. They've got 4 out of 250 chart of accounts. So this is an incredibly small file. Sales. I'm going to guess that they don't have an invoice set up yet. They just have the standard. Okay. Now, when you click on the invoice, you always have to go back into accounts and settings. So back to sales. Sales form, net 30, none, shipping off. Everything here is off. That's what I would probably expect to see. Show product service columns on sales forms, SKUs off. Okay, track quantity and price. Late fees are off. Progress invoicing is on. This is odd to me. I don't know why she'd need to progress invoice, especially since she isn't clearly sending out any invoices at this point that I've seen. I'm not going to I don't really care about the messages or reminders or deliveries or statements or anything like that. Just strictly looking at settings. No expense settings. There's no payments advanced. January accrual method. If they're this tiny, they're probably actually cash. So we want to ask that question. They haven't closed the books. Don't know the tax form. Not using numbers. We're pre-filling, which is okay. Everything else looks good to me. So what I'm going to do is go back to my form and I'm going to say, no, and then I'm going to put notes in. I'm going to say progress invoicing is turned on, but doesn't appear client is invoicing for services. I'm going to leave it at that because you'll see that there's actually a question about closing the books down here. Is a closing date and password entered? No. And I'm going to put, and this is a phrase I use all the time. So best practices state you should close and lock your books at the end of your tax period to ensure the source documents or source file for the tax year is not edited. Okay, now bank feeds. Are all bank accounts reconciled? There's also a question of are all credit cards reconciled? So you want to make sure you know the difference and how to find it. There's a couple of ways to find it. The way that I used to do it all the time was I'd go to reconcile, and usually if I saw this, I knew that there was probably nothing reconciled. So I go to history by account, and I go through every account that's listed here and see if there's anything at all. So there's a checking, a savings, looks like and a credit card and another credit card, and nothing's been reconciled. Okay, so I'm going to go back here and I'm going to say nope, and I'm going to say requires immediate action, because without reconciling, how do we trust the numbers? So that's always the note that I make. And I say without reconciling the bank accounts to, without reconciling your QBO file to your bank statements, the numbers cannot be trusted. This is the only way to ensure all transactions have been captured by the accounting software. Okay. And then I'm also going to type basically the same thing here. Without reconciling the credit card, there is no way to know for sure if all expenses and credit card payments have been accounted for. Okay. Now, if reconciled, do the reconciliation ending balances tie with the balance sheet? At this point, what I typically do is I'll go into reports and I will pull 2 reports for, depending on the time of year, you might want to do all of last year, you might want to do this year to date. You know, if it's a smaller company or they haven't been in business for very long, you can do all dates. I happen to know that this company, they just started using their books. So I'm going to pull for all dates. So I'm going to right click on balance sheet, and I am going to open this link in a new tab. And what that does is it's going to put the balance sheet over into a new tab for me without removing me from where I'm at. I'm also going to do the same thing with the profit and loss. I'm going to right click and open in a new tab. Then I'm going to go over to the balance sheet tab and I'm going to change the dates to all dates and run. And I'm going to do the same thing with the balance sheet, just so that we're looking at this, or I'm sorry, the profit and loss, just so we're looking at the same things. Okay. This does not look promising. Okay. Okay. So we've got a big uncategorized asset, but the question that we're looking at is if it's reconciled to reconciliations, ending balances tie with the balance sheet. It's not reconciled. So we're going to hit NA. Our bank feed set up and being used properly. This is where we're going to go back to that first tab where I call it my working tab. And this is where I'm basically looking at everything. So I'm going to go into the banking feed and I'm going to see a couple of things. I'm going to see if they're actually set up, when the last time it was run. So it looks like we've got the American Express, that's a credit card, Chase is a credit card, here's the savings, and here's the checking. So they're all set up, but very clearly we haven't gone through anything in probably a little while, looks like. So they're set up, yes, but they're not being used. So I'm going to say they're set up, but I'm going to say other, though they're set up correctly, it doesn't appear transactions have been reviewed, categorized, and accepted for quite some time. Okay, now we're going to move on to the chart of accounts. Is it set up in the correct order? What this is basically asking is, you know, does it make sense? Do we have banks listed first? Do we have cash listed first? Is it in the order it's supposed to be? With QuickBooks, you know, it basically does that, but what we're looking for is anything out of the ordinary. So, you know, checking, okay, good. We've got all of our assets listed first. We have literally 2, okay. So we've got assets, we've got liabilities, and now we're into equity. We do have an open balance equity. As we know, we should have zeros, but we do have personal investment and personal pay, retained earnings. We've got sales of product. That's probably okay for something this small. Cost of goods, probably not necessary in a consulting and coaching business. So we could probably get rid of that, but it's not killing anybody to have it now. And we've got a ton of these expenses that Ask My Accountant is listed as utilities. So that's not going to map right if we're going to at any point try and use any of the tax Intuit tax products to map this. So we need to check those kinds of things. Contractors, insurance, interest, job supplies, legal and professional, anything weird. What we're looking for here is anything that shouldn't be an expense. For instance, I had a client a while back who had babysitters listed as a business expense, and that is, not a business expense when you are a real estate agent. So, there's things like that you have to be on the lookout for to make sure you've dealt with that. So the only thing that I really see is this utility, this Ask My Accountant that's listed as utilities. Personally, I like to put Ask My Accountant and or Ask the Owner accounts as other expenses, but however you like to set up those suspense accounts is totally up to you. Just make sure you're consistent so you can keep track. So I'm going to go ahead and say that yes, it's set up in the correct order. Account numbers aren't being used, so I'm going to hit NA. And are they all the correct type? In this instance, yes, they are. Class tracking. This is a simple start file. Class tracking isn't available, so we don't have to worry about that. Undeposited funds. Is undeposited funds being used as it should be? The quickest way I have found to find this out is to hit the plus menu and go to bank deposit. If there's money sitting in undeposited funds, it's going to be sitting in here. This is quicker than trying to drill down in the balance sheet, and I don't see anything here. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go look at the balance sheet and see, nope, there's no undeposited funds. And in fact, if you remember, when we were going through the chart of accounts, there wasn't an undeposited funds account at all. So she's definitely not using it. Does she need to be using it? It seems that she's probably small enough that it doesn't matter too much. But if you have a client that's struggling with this, this is a great training opportunity, and you can bring it up in this report. I'm going to hit NA for the undeposited funds questions because she's not using it. So you can talk about if there's money sitting there or if it appears the client has a good understanding. This is where you might recommend training if you see issues. Okay, billable time. Again, this is one that Simple Start doesn't have, but the way you would check this is you would go in, maybe create an invoice for a customer that's listed, see if any billable time comes up. I'm not seeing any. I don't really see much here. This is the extent of her customers, so maybe I would go into one and hit invoice, and it's telling me this is your first invoice. There's no tray that pops out here. The tray is the dead giveaway that there's billable time or a billable expense or something that's supposed to go on the invoice. Again, you want to know the type of business your client is in, because if they have billable expenses or billable time and it doesn't make any sense for the type of business they have, then I would say something. Oh, look, I did that on my balance sheet tab. So I'm going to put this back to balance sheet. Okay. Sometimes I forget where I'm at and I just keep going in the same tab. Okay, so billable time modules not being used, sales tax not being used. To check that, we would go to taxes. And if it says set up sales tax, not being used. Again, this is a service-based business, so I wouldn't expect there to be sales tax, but you need to check your state rules to see if there should be or not. So I'm going to NA all the sales tax, item list. Are the items set up properly? To find the items, there's a couple of different ways. You can go to sales and down to products and services, or you can go up to your gear icon and under list is products and services. So here's what we're going to do. The very first thing is I want to go to this gear icon and I want to add the income account because I want to see right off the bat where these things are mapped. Because this is going to be a question that is going to be asked. I want to see if these are being mapped properly. Okay, so again, not a lot of income accounts, but if the business you're working on has a ton of income accounts They should probably have items that map to some of those. If everything looks a little odd, you might want to say something. In this instance, looks like we've got some coaching, a course, and speaking. It's all going to sales. There's no products. It's all service. So yes, everything is set up correctly because they are all listed as services. There's no inventory or non-inventory to worry about. Items properly linked to the correct income and expense accounts. In this case, yes, it is. They are all going to sales, which is fine. Marked taxable, non-taxable. None of these are marked taxable. Let's see here. And normally if they were, you would see that. So like I said, these are all services, so I doubt that they're taxable. So are they properly marked? Yes, they shouldn't be marked at all. Okay, so the next question has to do with vendors. Are there vendors that have been inactive for 18 months or greater and should be deactivated? This, I never really worry about that question too terribly much unless they have a super old file or they just have so many vendors that are just coming out the ears. But if you go to expenses and vendors, just take a quick look. She doesn't even have a vendor listed, so no. Should they be deactivated? No. Okay, are vendors being marked for 1099s? Again, you would check in the vendor section, and what I typically do here is I would spot check. So I would find someone's name or a business that, like a photography business or something that looks like it could get a 1099, and go in and check their settings to see if they are checked for a 1099. If not, I would check a couple more and see if that's a thing, or if maybe you just found a fluke, and then bring it up. But ideally, it helps if they check their vendors for 1099s because it makes their life easier at the end of the year. It makes your life easier too. The other place you can look is if you go to workers and contractors. If they have contractors set up through payroll, you would want to, that's typically where a 1099 could go to. So those are two places to look. Are vendors being marked for 1099s? No, but then I'm going to say there are no vendors set up. Customers. So this is the same question for customers that we just dealt with vendors. Are there customers that have been inactive for 18 months or greater and should be deactivated? And I'm going to go into sales and customers and very quickly just look at a few of these. Again, I know this business is newer, and so I'm not expecting to see anything. If you have, like I said, a ton of clients or a ton of customers in here, you may want to just export the Excel spreadsheet and set up a pivot table to determine the last time something was applied to their account, whether it was an invoice or a sales receipt or a credit or anything. And if it's more than a couple years old, it probably could be taken care of. Most clients don't want to pay you to take care of that though, and they just will do it themselves. This is more just kind of letting them know. In this instance, I'm going to say no. Okay, AP. AP cannot be used in Simple Start, but these are important questions to know. Does the AP aging detail tie out to balance sheet? So this is where we're going to start running into needing reports. So let's say, I don't even know if those reports will pop up in here. Accounts receivable, sales and customers. Yeah, they're under expenses and vendors, under essentials and plus, there is an AP aging detail report. You can do the summary or the detail. I've done both. They are the same, just one obviously has more detail. But what you're doing is you want to pull that report for the same dates that you've pulled your balance sheet, and then compare those balances and make sure that they're the same. If they are not, your job is not to determine at this point why they are different. It is just to say here, nope, they don't tie out, and this needs more research. So don't get hung up in the weeds on this. I'm hitting NA. Are there any transactions and pay bills? How you would find that is under the plus menu, under vendors. You would go to pay bills. And the reason you go to pay bills is because that's going to pull up any open bills. Again, you see these arrows, that means you need to upgrade to even access this. So for me, it's still an NA. Any questionable items in the pay bills window? Again, an NA. But if you see a weird credit or something that seems really old, or maybe you came across a check in the checkbook that was already written for the same thing, there may be some duplication going on. It could be a training issue. It could be a lot of different things. But those are things you kind of want to look for here. There's no credits either for me, so I'm going to hit NA. Accounts receivable, we're going to basically answer the same questions. On this one, I can actually run the AR report. So I'm going to run the aging summary, which is probably 0 as it is. But remember, you want to change it to all dates or whatever period that you are looking at. So there shouldn't be anything here. There shouldn't be anything on the balance sheet, and there's no AR listed. So for me, it's an NA because she's not using it. Any item on the AR aging current. This is where you want to actually look at that aging report, and I would note anything that's older than probably 90 days. You might want to click on that, drill into it, and see if there is invoices that are really, really old. And if so, I would make a note that you need to go through the AR list with the client, because more than likely they haven't been using the books right, and they haven't been applying things right. There could be some duplicating revenues, or maybe they're accepting payments elsewhere and it's not getting recorded. So you want to go through that with the client. Are there any questionable items that may need to be removed? Again, that kind of goes hand in hand with the question right above it. You want to go through that with your client. Okay, this has to do with payroll. Payroll items. This question is a little odd for me in QBO, just because the setup is not the same as in the desktop version. If you're using the desktop version of payroll, where you can easily access the payroll items. So typically, if they're using payroll, it would be under workers and employees, and it wouldn't say let's get started. QBO does a pretty good job of walking you through exactly what you need in order to set up the books. And you can also have someone at the sales department help you set this up. So I don't usually worry about the payroll items unless I'm reviewing a desktop file. So I'm going to hit NA. My client's obviously not using that. Are the payroll items entered correctly? This is where you want to look for things like the 401ks. Are they pre-tax? Are they post-tax? Is there medical? Are the taxes set up correctly? NA for me. Payroll taxes being paid inside the module. So when you're inside the module, and I know you can't see it here, there's, the payroll, there's employees, there's a couple of different tabs, and one of them is taxes. So you'd want to go to that taxes tab and see if there are any past due reports or taxes in that column. NA for me. The payroll liabilities showing up unpaid in the liabilities window that have been paid. This is, again, more of a desktop question, but essentially what it's looking for is, do you know for a fact that some of these things have been paid, but they're still showing up? Does the payroll liabilities window tie with the payroll liabilities report? So you'd want to make a note of what the liabilities said on this taxes tab, then run a report. If you're using payroll, there's a section for payroll reports, and one of them would be the payroll liabilities. You'd want to run that report and see if they match. And then do both of those reports tie with the balance sheet? Again, that's going back to, oh, here I did it again. It's going back to the balance sheet and making sure that it all matches together. In this instance, there are no payroll liabilities, just credit cards. That's all that's listed. Okay, so NA for me. QuickBooks software. This is specifically a desktop section. This has to do with running verify and data utility updates and things like that. We don't ever have to do that with QBO. So I always hit NA and then I hit other, and I always say client is using QuickBooks Online. And then if you were doing desktop, you'd run a verify data, and is there a data problem, yes or no? And is a rebuild necessary, yes or no? Okay, invoicing and receiving payments. Now we've been through this file enough to know she's not invoicing anybody anything. You may need to go through and do some spot checking on clients, maybe go into your AR list and then go check on a couple of open invoices and see if they appear to be done correctly. In my instance, it's another NA. Do we have proper use of items, tax codes, etc.? Again, that's just spot checking some customers of theirs, and are payments being received properly against customer invoices. Mine is NA because mine's not using undeposited funds or invoicing. But again, this is where if you had already recognized a problem with undeposited funds, they probably are not receiving payments properly. So this would be an area you'd want to look at. The next section is for nonprofit specific. I set this up separately because my specialty is nonprofits, and so I see a lot of these. You may never see these. In this particular instance, this client is a for-profit, so I'm hitting NA on all of these. Now, mind you, if they are a nonprofit, that automatically means they should be using Plus. If they're not using Plus, it's a huge red flag because Plus has class tracking, which is what they're going to need, and it also has a use of budgets, and they're going to need that as well. So there's preferences, classes, restricted funds and grants, custom reports being used, bank rules set up for allocations. That's where class tracking comes in. No, our budget's being used. So you can pretty much hit NA if you ever have a for-profit on those sections. Now, under financial statements, what I found to be the most helpful is rather than listing out all of my concerns that I see on the balance sheet and profit and loss statements here, what I do is I just click Other and I type, please see attached balance sheet for detailed information. And then I do the same thing for the profit and loss. And then what I do is I download each report that I have open in QuickBooks Online. For detailed, I download them as PDFs and I attach them to the back of this report. And I will show you how I do that, as well as how I notate the profit and loss in the balance sheet for the clients if I find issues for detailed information. Okay, is there an opening equity balance on the balance sheet? Yes, there is. We already figured that out a while ago, so I'm going to hit yes, and then I'm going to say the opening. I always explain what the opening balance equity account is for clients because a lot of them just have no idea. Is a QuickBooks created account meant only to be used during the initial setup of your company file. Once all accounts are added, opening balance equity closes to an owner equity account. Okay, so that's going to be my note. Okay, do all balances on the balance sheet match their detail reports? So by this point, you've already checked AR/AP, you've already matched it to liabilities, you've probably already done it to sales tax liabilities, reconciliations. So this is either a big fat yes or a big fat no, or maybe an other where you say yes to some, no to others. In my case, it's an NA because I don't have any of those accounts on my balance sheet. Does retained earnings tie to the prior year? This is a newer question, and this is one where you just want to run about a comparative balance sheet and look at them from year to year and make sure that they tie. In this instance, obviously this client is new. She doesn't have a balance in retained earnings from last year, so I'm going to hit NA for my question. And then, are there any general ledger accounts appearing on the balance sheet or profit and loss that don't seem right? Anything that looks like it needs further investigation? This is kind of your catch-all. If we haven't gone over it at this point, this is where you're going to want to take just a real thorough look to see if you see any weird balances, negative assets or negative liabilities or equity, anything we haven't already addressed. In the balance sheet, I don't really see anything. And in the profit and loss, I don't really see anything. But again, this is clearly not complete. She hasn't gone through the bank feeds at all. So in this instance, I'm going to hit no. And that's the last question. So you're going to click submit at this point. And then behind the scenes, there's this fun little add-on to Forms that is throwing all of this into a formatted report Google Doc. And the Google Doc is what you're going to go to next. You're going to look at it, edit it, make sure it looks nice. If you've taken any screenshots while you're going through the review, maybe you take a screenshot of the AR aging detail to point to some weird balances, or you show proof that there's no reconciliations by taking a screenshot of the blank reconciliation history screen. Whatever you want to do, you can add them here. You can now close out this window, and we're going to go back to our complete check folder. And as you can see, it's either going to show up right here in the list. In my situation, it pops just right into the list for me, and then when I'm done with it, I stick it in finished. But yours are going to be actually inside finished. So you will want to look inside your actual folder, but mine is here. So I'm going to open it up. And my first item that I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that everything pops up right. I'm going to go look at the ends and the beginnings of reports, or of the pages, to make sure nothing. I want my sections to be on each page. So for instance, I wouldn't want 1 or 2 questions of section 5 to be on the next page. If it's feeding over into the next page, I'm going to just stick it to the next page. But this looks okay. Everything's looking okay. As you can see, here's all my NAs. So anything that's bolded is the question that was asked. Anything that is not in bold is what you typed. So here's the answer: no, there are no vendors currently set up. That's the vendors section, okay? QuickBooks software NA, client is using QuickBooks Online. That's what you typed in, or what I typed in. This particular file has a ton of NAs. Let's see. So please, here's where I want them to look at the attached balance sheet, profit and loss, the notes that I made about opening balance, equity, etc. Again, I'm just double checking to make sure no questions are falling over. Now, at the end of this report is another section where you can freeform and type whatever notes you want. You may have discovered a tiny problem that is really not worth worrying about, but you want to bring it up. You add those to the bottom. If you're not going to, then get rid of it. But it's on every single report, so you need to, at a very minimum, get rid of that section if you're not going to fill it out. Once you do that, then we're going to go to File. Once you're happy with it, you've added in your screenshots, whatever you have, we're going to download it as a PDF document. And while it's doing that, I'm also going to run over to my balance sheet, which is for all dates, and I'm going to download that as a PDF document. Save as a PDF. And the same thing with the profit and loss. All dates, export to PDF, save as a PDF. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to go and look in my documents folder, or my downloads folder, which is where everything downloads. For me, I'm on a Mac, so I go to my Finder and I look for downloads, and voila, there's a balance sheet, there's a profit and loss, and there's the complete check that I just did. I want to open all 3 of them. If you're using a PC, you'll just navigate to where your items download and you'll do the same thing, but you definitely want to open all 3, but you want them to be open in Adobe Acrobat. This is the key to combining things, especially different PDF files, so it just becomes one. If you don't have Adobe Acrobat, there's no reason why you can't just attach the report and the balance sheet and profit and loss separately. I would just make notes about the balance sheet and profit and loss inside the report itself. So I have everything open. I'm going to go over to Tools here, and I'm going to hit Combine Files. And it's going to say, do you want to add files, or do you want to add the open files? I'm going to add the open files. Are those the 3? Yep. And then it's going to put them in a weird order. I want my complete check first, I want my balance sheet second, and I want my profit and loss third. That's how it flows in the report, and that's how I want it to flow. So then I'm going to hit Combine, and then I'm going to Save As. And I'm going to save this as I'm just going to save it into downloads for now, but normally I would save it in their client file. And I'm going to save it as client's name, complete check. And then I always put in parentheses final, because that helps me determine very quickly if it's the draft one that doesn't have the profit and loss, or if it's the one that's the combined. So that's what I do. So here's my report. Looks good. I'm going to go to the end to where the balance sheet and the profit and loss are. I want to mark this up. So what I do is I use the highlight text function, and anything that I think is weird, if it's just the number that's weird, I'm just going to highlight the number. If everything in this section is weird, I'm going to highlight the whole thing. In this particular instance, we don't have any reconciliations, and I know I addressed that already, but I want to make a note of it. So once I highlight it, I can actually, I can make a comment. Oops, let's see here. I want to make a comment, and I'm going to put no reconciliations done. You don't need to be as detailed as you were in the report, just simple. Uncategorized asset, what the hell? We're going to look at this. These need to be researched and categorized accordingly. Post. Okay. You don't have to highlight absolutely everything, but if things look weird, then yes, highlight it. Again, I'm going to actually highlight the whole credit card as opposed to just the one, because I know that there are 2 credit cards, but only one showing up. 2 credit cards in chart of accounts, but only one listed here. Verify other card has 0 balance. Also need to reconcile credit cards. Post. Opening balance equity. Yep, we're going to highlight that sucker, and we're just going to say need to reclassify. So that's how you're going to make your notes. Once you're done doing this, you're going to do it for both. So anything that's weird on this one, what I'm probably going to do is I'm just going to highlight the very bottom number, and I'm just going to say, dude, right? I'm going to say bank feeds have not been kept up with, many expenses and income transactions missing. This number for net income is not correct. But normally, you know, on a normal balance sheet, typically, or profit and loss, you're going to see a bunch of different accounts, and you're going to highlight the ones that are weird. If you have miscellaneous accounts or uncategorized accounts, you're always going to highlight those and always mention that we need to find a home for those transactions, that sort of thing. So those are all the notes that I'm going to take on this particular file. I am then going to save it, and I have my final report. From here, it just depends on how you want to get the information to your client. I don't quote inside the report, because if they take this report to someone else, I don't want someone else to see what I was going to charge them. So typically what I'll do is I'll go into my email. I will attach the report. I have kind of a canned message that says, you know, here are the findings from your complete check, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Your report's attached. Feel free to take a look. And then my second paragraph is where I quote. And I would say, you know, based on my review of your file, it is going to be, let's just say $1,000 to clean up your books. And then, you know, after the fees for the complete check, say I charge $300 for that, that means your balance is $700. I require half up front and half at the end. You know, please let me know how you wish to proceed. And then I always say, there's no pressure. If you choose not to have us do your cleanup, this report is still yours to keep. And just leave it at that. And then I set myself a reminder for about 3 or 4 days to check if I haven't heard anything back yet. So that's essentially the process of how you go about doing the complete check, how to review the file, how to get it into the actual report form, and how to get it off to your client. So I hope you enjoy this video and have a great night.